The Mutiny of the Mavericks by Rudyard Kipling. Sec 7, cause enforces regular forces, I considering belonging reserve forces with other a mutiny to her auxiliary forces. Persons to sedition majesty's navy. Cause, when three obscure gentlemen in San Francisco argued on insufficient premises, they condemned a fellow creature to a most unpleasant death in a far country, which had nothing whatever to do with the United States. They foregathered at the top of a tenement house in Tehama Street, an unsavory quarter of the city, and their calling for certain drinks they conspired, because they were conspirators by trade officially known as the Third Three of the Roman 1a on institution, for the propagation of pure light not to be confounded with any others, though. It is affiliated to many. The second three live in Montreal and work among the poor there. The first three have their home in New York, not far from Castle Garden, and write regularly once a week to a small house near one of the big hotels at Boulogne. What happens after that particular section of Scotland Yard knows too well and laughs at a conspirator detests. Ridicule, more men have been stabbed with Lucrezia Borgia daggers and dropped into the Thames for laughing at head centers and triangles than for betraying secrets. For this is human nature. The third three conspired over whiskey cocktails and a clean sheet of notepaper against the British Empire. And all that lay there in this work is very like what men without discernment call politics before a general election. You pick out and discuss in the company of congenial friends all the weak points in your opponent's organization, and unconsciously dwell upon and exaggerate all their mishaps, till it seems to you a miracle that the hated party holds together for an hour. Our principle is not so much active demonstration that we leave to others' passive embarrassment to weaken and unnerve. Said the first man, wherever an organization is crippled, wherever a confusion is thrown into any branch of any department, we gain a step for those who take on the work. We are, but the forerunners. He was a German enthusiast and editor of a newspaper from whose leading articles he quoted frequently. That cursed empire makes so many blunders of her own that unless we doubled the year's average, I guess, it wouldn't strike her anything special had occurred. Said the second man. Are you prepared to say that all our resources are equal to blowing off the muzzle of a 100-ton gun, or spiking a 10,000-ton ship on a plain rock? In clear daylight they can beat us at our own game. Better join hands with the practical branches wherein funds now try a direct scare in a crowded street. They value their greasy hides. He was the drag upon the wheel, and an Americanized Irishman of the second generation, despising his own race and hating the other. He had learned caution. The third man drank his cocktail and spoke no word. He was the strategist, but unfortunately his knowledge of life was limited. He picked a letter from his breast pocket and threw it across the table. That epistle to the heathen contained some very concise directions from the first three in New York, it said. The boom in black iron has already affected the eastern markets, where our agents have been forcing down the English-held stock. Among the smaller buyers who watch the turn of shares, any immediate operations, such as Western bears, would increase their willingness to unload. This, however, cannot be expected till they see clearly that foreign ironmasters are willing to cooperate. Mulcahy should be dispatched to feel the pulse of the market and act accordingly. Mavericks are at present the best for our purpose. B. Roman 500 Q. As a message referring to an iron crisis in Pennsylvania, it was interesting, if not lucid. As a new departure in organized attack on an outlying English dependency, it was more than interesting. The second man read it through and murmured, already surely they are in too great a hurry. All that Julep Singh could do in India, he has done down to the distribution of his photographs. Among the peasantry, ho-ho, the Paris firm arranged that. And he has no substantial money backing from the other power, even our agents in India? No, he hasn't. What is the use of our organization wasting men on work that is already done? Of course, the Irish regiments in India are half mutinous as they stand. This shows how near a lie may come to the truth. An Irish regiment, for just so long as it stands still, is generally a hard handful to control, being reckless and rough. When, however, it is moved in the direction of musketry firing, it becomes strangely and unpatriotically content with its lot. It has even been heard to cheer the Queen with enthusiasm on these occasions. But the notion of tampering with the army was, from the point of view of Tehama Street, an altogether sound one. There is no shadow of stability in the policy of an English government, and the most sacred oaths of England would, even if engrossed on vellum, find very few buyers among colonies and dependencies that have suffered from vain beliefs. But there remains to England always her army that cannot change, except in the matter of uniform and equipment, the officers may write to the papers demanding the heads of the horse guards. In default of cleaner redress for grievances, the men may break loose across a country town and seriously startle the publicans, but neither officers nor men have it in their composition to mutiny, after the continental manner, the English people, when they trouble to think about the army at all, are, and with justice, absolutely assured that it is absolutely trustworthy. Imagine for a moment their emotions on realizing that such and such a regiment was in open revolt from causes directly due to England's management of Ireland. They would probably send the regiment to the polls forthwith and examine their own consciences as to their duty to Erin, but they would never be easy any more, and it was this vague, unhappy mistrust that the Roman 1AA were laboring to produce. Sheer waste of breath, said the second man, after a pause in the council. I don't see the use of tampering with their fool army, but it has been tried before, and we must try it again. It looks well in the reports. If we send one man from here, you may bet your life that other men are going too. Border up Mulcahy. They ordered him, Yupa, slim, slight, dark-haired young man, devoured with that blind, rancorous hatred of England that only reaches its full growth across the Atlantic. He had sucked it from his mother's breast in the little cabin at the back of the northern avenues of New York. He had been taught his rights and his wrongs in German and Irish on the canal fronts of Chicago and San Francisco. Held men who told him strange and awful things of the great blind power over the seas. Once, when business took him across the Atlantic, he had served in an English regiment, and being insubordinate had suffered extremely. He drew all his ideas of England that were not bred by the cheaper patriotic prince from one iron-fisted colonel and an unbending adjutant. He would go to the mines, if need be, to teach his gospel, and he went as his instructions advised. P. Roman 500 q, which means, with speed to introduce embarrassment into an Irish regiment, already half mutinous, quartered among Sikh peasantry, all wearing miniatures of His Highness Julip Singh Maharaja of the Punjab next their hearts, and all eagerly expecting his arrival. Other information equally valuable was given him by his masters. He was to be cautious, but never to grudge expense in winning the hearts of the men in the regiment. His mother in New York would supply funds, and he was to write to her once a month. Life is pleasant for a man who has a mother in New York to send him £200 a year over and above his regimental pay. In process of time, thanks to his intimate knowledge of drill and musketry, exercised the excellent Mulcahy, wearing the corporal's stripe, went out in a troopship, and joined Her Majesty's Royal Loyal Musketeers, commonly known as the Mavericks, because they were masterless and unbranded cattle sons of small farmers in County Clare, shoeless vagabonds of Kerry, herders of Ballyvegan, much wanted moonlighters from the bare rainy headlands of the south coast, officered by O'More's Brady's Hills Kilreas, and the like. Never to outward seeming was there more promising material to work on. The first three had chosen their regiment well. It feared nothing that moved or talked save the colonel and the regimental Roman Catholic chaplain, the fat Father Dennis, who held the keys of heaven and hell and blared like an angry bull when he desired to be convincing him. Also it loved because, on occasions of stress, he was used to tuck up his cassock and charge with the rest into the merriest of the fray, where he always found good man that the saints sent him a revolver when there was a fallen private to be protected, or but this came as an afterthought, his own grey head to be guarded. Cautiously as he had been instructed, tenderly, and with much beer, Mulcahy opened his projects to such as he deemed fittest to listen, and these were one and all of that quaint, crooked, sweet, profoundly irresponsible, and profoundly lovable race that fight like fiends, argue like children, reason like women, obey like men, and jest like their own goblins of the wrath through rebellion, loyalty, want, woe, or war. The underground work of a conspiracy is always dull and very much the same the world over. At the end of 6 months the seed, always falling on good ground. Mulcahy spoke almost explicitly, hinting darkly in the approved fashion at dread powers behind him, and advising nothing more nor less than mutiny. Were they not dogs evilly treated, had they not all their own and their national revenges to satisfy? Who in these days would do aught to 900 men in rebellion? Who again could stay them if they broke for the sea, licking up on their way other regiments, only too anxious to join? And afterwards here followed windy promises of gold and preferment, office, and honor ever dear to a certain type of Irishman. As he finished his speech in the dusk of a twilight to his chosen associates, there was a sound of a rapidly unslung belt behind him. The arm of one, Dan Grady, flew out in the gloom and arrested something. Then said Dan, Mulcahy Ure a great man and you do credit to whoever sent you walk about a bit. While we think of it, Mulcahy departed elate he knew his words would sink deep. Why the tripledashed asterisks did he not let me belt him? Grunted a voice. Because I am not a fat-headed fool boys tease, what he's been driving at these 6 months are superior corporal, with his education, and his copies of the Irish papers, and his everlasting beer, he's been sent for the purpose. And that's where the money comes from. Can ye not see that man's a gold mine which horse Egan here would have destroyed with a belt buckle it would be throwing away? The gifts of Providence not to fall in with his little plans of course well mutiny, till all's dry shoot the colonel on the parade ground massacre. The company officers ransacked the arsenal and then boys, did he tell you what next he told me the other night, when he was beginning to talk wild? Then we're to join with the niggers and look for help from Julep Singh and the Russians. And spoil the best campaign that ever was this side of hell Danny id, have lost the beer to ha given him the belting he requires. Oh let him go this a while man he's got no constructiveness. But that's the egg meat of his plan, and you must understand that I'm in with it and so, are you well want oceans of beer to convince us firmaments full well give him talk for his money. And one by one, all the boys LL come in, and hell have a nest of 900 mutineers to squat in and give drink to. What makes me killing mad is his wanting us to do what the niggers did 30 years gone, that in his pig's cheek, in saying that other regiments would come along, said a Kerry man. That's not so bad as Hinton, we should loose off on the colonel. Colonel be sugared id as soon as not put a shot through his helmet, to see him jump and clutch his old horse's head, but Mulcahy talks shoot in our company orfsers accidental. He said that did he said horse Egan. Something like that anyways can't ye fancy ud Barber Brady wid a bullet in his lungs coffin like a sick monkey, and sayin' boys, I do not mind your gettin' D.A. trunk. But you must hood your liquor like men, the man that shot me is D.A. trunk, ill, suspend investigations for 6 hours while I get this bullet cut out and then continued Horse Egan for the peppery major's peculiarities of speech and manner, were as well known as his tanned face, and then ye dissolute half-baked putta-faced scum o' Connemara. If I find a man so much as looking confused begad ill court-martial, the whole company, a man that can't get over his liquor in 6 hours, is not fit to belong to the Mavericks. A shout of laughter bore witness to the truth of the sketch. It's pretty to think of said the Kerry man slowly Mulcahy would have us do all the devilment, and get clear himself some ways. He wouldn't be talkin' all this fool's throuble in S.H. Poylan, the reputation of the regiment. Reputation of your grandmother's pig, said Dan. Well, and he had a good reputation too, so it's all right Mulcahy must see his way to clear out behind him, or he not ha come so far talkin' powers of darkness. Did you hear anything of a regimental court-martial, among the Black Bonans? These days half a company of M, took one of the new draft and hanged him by his arms with a tent-rope from a third-story veranda. They gave no reason for so doin'. But he was half dead I am thinking that the Bonans are short-sighted. It was a friend of Mulcahy's, or a man in the same trade. They'd a deal better ha taken his beer, returned Dan reflectively. Better still ha handed him up to the colonel, said Horse Egan, onless but sure the news would be all over the country, and give the regiment a bad name. And there'd be no reward for that, man's. But when about talkin', said the Kerry man artlessly. You speak by your breed, said Dan. With a laugh, there was never a Kerry man yet that wouldn't sell his brother for a pipe o' tobacco, and a pat on the back from a policeman. Praise God I am not a bloomin' orangeman, was the answer. No, nor never will be, said Dan, they breed men in Ulster. Would you like to try the taste of one? The Kerry man looked and longed, but forbore the odds of battle were too great. Then y'all not even give Mulcahy a strike for his money, said the voice of Horse Egan, who regarded what he called trouble of any kind as the pinnacle of felicity. Dan answered not at all, but crept on tiptoe with large strides to the messroom. The men following the room was empty. In a corner cased like the king of Dahomey's state umbrella stood the regimental colors. Dan lifted them tenderly and unrolled in the light of the candles the record of the Mavericks tattered, worn, and hacked. The white satin was darkened everywhere with big brown stains, the gold threads on the crowned harp were frayed and discolored. And the red bull, the totem of the Mavericks, was coffee-hued, the stiff embroidered folds whose price is human life, rustled down slowly. The Mavericks keep their colors long and guard them very sacredly. Vittoria Salamanca, Toulouse, Waterloo, Moudki, Ferrussia, and Sabriant that was fought close next door here against the very beggars. He wants us to join in Kerman the Alma Sebastopol. What are those little businesses compared to the campaigns of General Mulcahy? The Mutiny think, oh, that the Mutiny and some dirty little matters in Afghanistan, and for that and these, and those Dan pointed to the names of glorious battles that Yankee man with the parton in his hair. Comes and says as easy as have a drink holy Moses, there's the captain. But it was the messergeant who came in just as the men clattered out, and found the colors uncased. From that day dated the mutiny of the Mavericks to the joy of Mulcahy, and the pride of his mother in New York, good lady, who sent the money for the beer, never so far as words went. Was such a mutiny, the conspirators led by Dan Grady and Horse Egan poured in daily. They were sound men to be trusted, and they all wanted blood. But first they must have beer, they cursed the queen they mourned over Ireland, they suggested hideous plunder of the Indian countryside, and then alas some of the younger men would go forth and wallow on the ground in spasms of wicked laughter. The genius of the Irish for conspiracies is remarkable, none the less they would swear no oaths, but those of their own making which were rare and curious, and they were always at pains to impress Mulcahy with the risks they ran naturally, the flood of beer-wrought demoralization. But Mulcahy confused the causes of things, and when a very muzzy maverick smote a sergeant on the nose, or called his commanding officer a bald-headed old lard-bladder, and even worse names, he fancied that rebellion and not liquor was at the bottom of the outbreak. Other gentlemen who have concerned themselves in larger conspiracies have made the same error. The hot season in which they protested no man could rebel came to an end, and Mulcahy suggested a visible return for his teachings. As to the actual upshot of the mutiny, he cared nothing, it would be enough if the English infatuatedly trusting to the integrity of their army should be startled with news of an Irish regiment revolting from political considerations. His persistent demands would have ended at Dan's instigation in a regimental belting, which in all probability would have killed him and cut off the supply of beer, had not he been sent on special duty some 50 miles away from the cantonment to cool his heels in a mud fort and dismount obsolete artillery. Then the colonel of the Mavericks, reading his newspaper diligently and scenting frontier trouble from afar, posted to the army headquarters and pled with the commander-in-chief for certain privileges to be granted under certain contingencies, which contingencies came about only a week later when the annual little war on the border developed itself, and the colonel returned to carry the good news to the Mavericks. He held the promise of the chief for active service, and the men must get ready. On the evening of the same day, Mulcahy, an unconsidered corporality at Great Inn, conspiracy returned to cantonments, and heard sounds of strife and howlings. From afar off the mutiny had broken out, and the barracks of the Mavericks were one whitewashed pandemonium, a private tearing. Through the barrack square gasped in his ear service active service. It's a burnin' shame, oh joy, the Mavericks had risen on the eve of battle. They would not noble and loyal sons of Ireland serve the Queen longer. The news would flash through the countryside and over to England, and he Mulcahy trusted of the third three had brought about the crash. The private stood in the middle of the square, and cursed colonel regiment officers, and doctor, particularly the doctor by his gods, an orderly of the native cavalry regiment, clattered through the mob of soldiers. He was half lifted, half dragged from his horse, beaten on the back with mighty handclaps, till his eyes watered, and called all manner of endearing names. Yes, the Mavericks had fraternized with the native troops, who then was the agent among the latter that had blindly wrought with Mulcahy so well. An officer slunk almost ran from the mess to a barrack. He was mobbed by the infuriated soldiery, who closed round, but did not kill him, for he fought his way to shelter flying for the life. Mulcahy could have wept with pure joy and thankfulness. The very prisoners in the guardroom were shaking the bars of their cells and howling like wild beasts, and from every barrack poured the booming as of a big war drum. Mulcahy hastened to his own barrack. He could hardly hear himself speak. 80 men were pounding with fist and heel, the tables and trestles. 80 men flushed with mutiny, stripped to their shirt sleeves, their knapsacks half-packed for the march to the sea, made the 2-inch boards thunder again, as they chanted to a tune that Mulcahy knew well, the sacred war song of the Mavericks. Listen in the north, my boys, there's trouble on the wind, tramp, O Cossack hooves, in front, gray greatcoats, behind, trouble, on the frontier of a most amazin' kind, trouble on the waters, O the Oxus. Then, as a table broke under the furious accompaniment, hurrah, hurrah, it's north by west, we go, hurrah, hurrah, the chance we wanted, so let 'em hear the chorus from Umbella to Moscow, as we go marchin' to the Kremlin. Mother of all the saints in bliss, and all the devils in cinders, where's my fine new sock? Without the heel-howled horse, Egan ransacking everybody's valise. But his own, he was engaged in making up deficiencies of kit preparatory to a campaign, and in that work, he steals best who steals last. A Mulcahy in good time, he shouted, we've got the route, and we're off on Thursday for a picnic with the Lancers next door. An ambulance orderly appeared with a huge basket full of lint rolls, provided by the forethought of the Queen, for such as might need them later on horse. Egan unrolled his bandage, and flicked it under Mulcahy's nose, chanting, sheepskin and beeswax thunder pitch, and plaster, the more you try to pull it off the more it sticks the faster. As I was goin' to New Orleans. You know the rest of it, my Irish American. Jew boy, by gad, ye have to fight for the Queen in the inside, ave a fortnight, my darlin'. A roar of laughter interrupted Mulcahy, looked vacantly down the room. Bid a boy defy his father, when the pantomime cab is at the door, or a girl develop a will of her own, when her mother is putting the last touches to the first ball dress. But do not ask an Irish regiment to embark upon mutiny, on the eve of a campaign, when it has fraternized with the native regiment that accompanies it, and driven its officers into retirement with 10,000 clamorous questions, and the prisoners dance for joy, and the sick men stand in the open, calling down all known diseases on the head of the doctor, who has certified that they are medically unfit for active service, at even the Mavericks might have been mistaken for mutineers by one so unversed in their natures, as Mulcahy at dawn. A girls' school might have learned deportment from them. They knew that their colonel's hand had closed, and that he who broke that iron discipline would not go to the front. Nothing in the world will persuade one of our soldiers when he is ordered to the north on the smallest of affairs that he is not immediately going gloriously to slay Cossacks and cook his kettles in the palace of the Tsar. A few of the younger men mourned for Mulcahy's beer, because the campaign was to be conducted on strict temperance principles. But as Dan and Horse Egan said sternly, we've got the beerman with us, he shall drink now on his own hook. Mulcahy had not taken into account the possibility of being sent on active service. He had made up his mind that he would not go under any circumstances, but fortune was against him. Sick you, said the doctor, who had served an unholy apprenticeship to his trade, in Tralee poorhouses, you're only homesick, and what you call varicose veins, come from overeating a little gentle exercise. Will cure that, and later, Mulcahy, my man, everybody is allowed to apply for a sick certificate. Once, if he tries it twice, we call him by an ugly name. Go back to your duty, and let's hear no more of your diseases. I am ashamed to say that Horse Egan enjoyed the study of Mulcahy's soul in those days, and Dan took an equal interest. Together, they would communicate to their corporal all the dark lore of death, which is the portion of those who have seen men die. Egan had the larger experience, but Dan the finer imagination. Mulcahy shivered when the former spoke of the knife as an intimate acquaintance, or the latter dwelt with loving particularity on the fate of those who, wounded and helpless, had been overlooked by the ambulances and had fallen into the hands of the Afghan womenfolk. Mulcahy knew that the mutiny, for the present at least, was dead. Knew too that a change had come over Dan's usually respectful attitude towards him, and Horse Egan's laughter and frequent allusions to abortive conspiracies emphasized all that the conspirator had guessed. The horrible fascination of the death stories, however, made him seek the men's society. He learnt much more than he had bargained for, and in this manner it was on the last night before the regiment entrained to the front. The barracks were stripped of everything movable, and the men were too excited to sleep. The bare walls gave out a heavy hospital smell of chloride of lime. And what said Mulcahy in an Austrican whisper, after some conversation on the eternal subject, are you going to do to me? Dan, this might have been the language of an able conspirator, conciliating a weak spirit. Y'all see, said Dan, grimly turning over in his cot, or I rather should say y'all not see. This was hardly the language of a weak spirit. Mulcahy shook under the bedclothes. Be easy with him, put in Egan from the next cot. He has got his chance. Oh, go and clean. Listen, Mulcahy. All we want is, for the good sake of the regiment, that you take your death standing up, as a man should. There be heaps and heaps of enemy-plenteous heaps. Go there and do all you can and die decent. Y'all die with a good name. Their tease, not a hard thing considerin'. Again Mulcahy shivered. And how could a man wish to die better than fightin', added Dan consolingly. And if I want, said the corporal in a dry whisper. There'll be a dale of smoke, returned Dan, sitting up and ticking off the situation on his fingers, sure to be, and the noise of the fear in LL. Be tremendous and well be running about up and down the regiment. Well, but we horse and well stay by you Mulcahy, and never let you go maybe there'll be an accident. It's playing it low on me, let me go for pity's sake. Let me go I never did you harm and I stood you as much beer as I could oh don't be hard on me, Dan you Arahu, we're in it too, you want kill me up there will you? I'm not thinkin' of the treason though you should be glad, any honest boys drank with you it's. For the regiment, we can't have the shame oh you bringin' shame on us. You went to the doctor quiet as a sick cat, to get, and stay behind and live with the women at the depot that wanted us to run to the sea in wolf packs like the rebels, none of your black blood dared to be, but we knew about your goin' to the doctor for he told in mess. And it's all over the regiment bane, as we are your best friends, we didn't allow anyone to molest you, yet we will see to you ourselves fight which you will us or the enemy I'll never lie in that cot again. And there's more glory and maybe less kicks from fightin' the enemy that's fair speakin'. And he told us by word of mouth to go and join with the niggers you've forgotten, that Dan said horse egan to justify sentence. What's the use of plague when the man one shot pays for all sleep ye sound Mulcahy, but you understand do ye not? Mulcahy for some weeks understood very little of anything at all save that, ever at his elbow in camp, or at parade, stood two big men with soft voices adjuring him to commit harakari, lest a worse thing should hapento die for the honor of the regiment in decency, among the nearest knives. But Mulcahy dreaded death, he remembered certain things that priests had said in his infancy, and his mother not the one at New York starting from her sleep with shrieks to pray for a husband's soul in torment. It is well to be of a cultured intelligence, but in time of trouble, the weak human mind returns to the creed it sucked in at the breast. And if that creed be not a pretty one, trouble follows. Also, the death he would have to face would be physically painful. Most conspirators have large imaginations. Mulcahy could see himself, as he lay on the earth in the night dying by various causes. They were all horrible. The mother in New York was very far away. And the regiment, the engine that once you fall in its grip, moves you forward whether you will or want, was daily coming closer to the enemy. They were brought to the field of Marzun Kati, and with the Black Bonans to aid they fought a fight that has never been set down in the newspapers in response. Many believed to the fervent prayers of Father Dennis. The enemy not only elected to fight in the open, but made a beautiful fight, as many weeping Irish mothers knew later. They gathered behind walls or flickered across the open in shouting masses, and were put valiant in artillery. It was expedient to hold a large reserve and wait for the psychological moment that was being prepared by the shrieking shrapnel. Therefore the Mavericks lay down in open order on the brow of a hill to watch the play, till their call should come. Father Dennis, whose duty was in the rear to smooth the trouble of the wounded, had naturally managed to make his way to the foremost of his boys, and lay like a black porpoise at length on the grass. To him crawled Mulcahy, ashen gray, demanding absolution. Wait till you're a shot, said Father Dennis sweetly, there's a time for everything. Dan Grady chuckled as he blew for the 50th time into the breech of his speckless rifle. Mulcahy groaned, and buried his head in his arms till a stray shot spoke like a snipe immediately above his head. And a general heave and tremor rippled the line. Other shots followed, and a few took effect as a shriek or a grunt attested. The officers who had been lying down with the men rose, and began to walk steadily up and down the front of their companies. This maneuver, executed not for publication, but as a guarantee of good faith to soothe men, demands nerve. You must not hurry, you must not look nervous, though you know that you are a mark for every rifle within extreme range, and above all, if you are smitten, you must make as little noise as possible and roll inwards through the files. It is at this hour, when the breeze brings the first salt whiff of the powder to noses rather cold at the tip, and the eye can quietly take in the appearance of each red casualty, that the strain on the nerves is strongest. Scotch regiments can endure for half a day and abate no whit of their zeal at the end. English regiments sometimes sulk under punishment, while the Irish, like the French, are apt to run forward by ones and twos, which is just as bad as running back. The truly wise commandant of highly strung troops allows them, in seasons of waiting, to hear the sound of their own voices uplifted in song. There is a legend of an English regiment that lay by its arms under fire, chanting Sam Hall, to the horror of its newly appointed and pious colonel. The Black Bonans, who were suffering more than the Mavericks on a hill half a mile away, began presently to explain to all who cared to listen. Well sound the jubilee from the centre to the sea, and Ireland shall be free, says the Shan Van Vogue. Sing, boys, said Father Dennis softly. It looks as if we cared for their Afghan peace. Dan Grady raised himself to his knees and opened his mouth in a song imparted to him, as to most of his comrades in the strictest confidence by Mulcahy, then lying limp and fainting on the grass, the chill fear of death upon him. Company after company caught up the words which the Roman 1a say are to herald the general rising of Aaron, and to breathe, which except to those duly appointed to hear, is death, wherefore they are printed in this place. The Saxon in heaven's just balance is weighed, his doom like Belshazzar's in death has been cast, and the hand of the venger shall never be stayed, till his race, faith, and speech are a dream of the past. They were heart-filling lines, and they ran with a swirl. The Roman 1a are better served by their pens than their petards. Dan clapped Mulcahy merrily on the back, asking him to sing up. The officers lay down again. There was no need to walk any more. Their men were soothing themselves thunderously thus. St. Mary in heaven has written the vow that the land shall not rest, till the heretic blood from the babe at the breast, to the hand at the plough, has rolled to the ocean like Shannon in flood. "I'll speak to you after all's over," said Father Dennis authoritatively, in Dan's ear. "What's the use of confessing to me? When you do this foolishness, Dan, you've been playing with fire. I'll lay you more penance in a week then. Come along to purgatory with us, Father dear. The Bonins are on the move, Thale. Let us go now." The regiment rose to the blast of the bugle, as one man, but one man there was who rose more swiftly than all the others, for half an inch of bayonet was in the fleshy part of his leg. "You've got to do it," said Dan grimly. "Do it decent anyhow." And the roar of the rush drowned his words, for the rear companies thrust forward, the first still singing as they swung down the slope. "From the child at the breast to the hand at the plough, shall roll to the ocean like Shannon in flood." They should have sung it in the face of England, not of the Afghans, whom it impressed as much as did the wild Irish yell. "They came down singing," said the unofficial report of the enemy borne from village to village. "The next day, they continued to sing. And it was written that our men could not abide when they came. It is believed that there was magic in the aforesaid song." Dan and Horse Egan kept themselves in the neighborhood of Mulcahy twice. The man would have bolted back in the confusion twice. He was heaved, kicked, and shouldered back again into the unpaintable inferno of a hotly contested charge. At the end, the panic excess of his fear drove him into madness. Beyond all human courage, his eyes, staring at nothing, his mouth open and frothing and breathing, as one in a cold bath. He went forward demented, while Dan twirled after him. The charge checked at a high mud wall. It was Mulcahy who scrambled up tooth and nail, and hurled down among the bayonets the amazed Afghan who barred his way. It was Mulcahy keeping to the straight line of the rabid dog, who led a collection of ardent souls at a newly unmasked battery, and flung himself on the muzzle of a gun, as his companions danced among the gunners. It was Mulcahy who ran wildly on from that battery into the open plain, where the enemy were retiring in sullen groups. His hands were empty, he had lost helmet and belt, and he was bleeding from a wound in the neck. Dan and Horse Egan, panting and distressed, had thrown themselves down on the ground by the captured guns when they noticed Mulcahy's charge. "Mad," said Horse Egan, critically mad with fear. "He's going straight to his death, and shouting's no use. Let him go. Watch now. If we fire, well, hit him maybe." The last of a hurrying crowd of Afghans turned at the noise of shod feet behind him, and shifted his knife, ready to hand. This, he saw, was no time to take prisoners. Mulcahy tore on, sobbing. The straight-held blade went home through the defenseless breast, and the body pitched forward almost before a shot from Dan's rifle brought down the slayer. And still further hurried the Afghan retreat. The two Irishmen went out to bring in their dead. "He was given the point, and that was an easy death," said Horse Egan, viewing the corpse. "But would you ha shot him, Danny, if he had lived?" "He didn't live, so there's no sayin', but I doubt I would have be case of the fun he gave us. Let alone the beer. Hike up his legs, Horse, and well, bring him in. Perhaps tea's better this way." They bore the poor limp body to the mass of the regiment, lolling open-mouthed on their rifles, and there was a general snigger when one of the younger subalterns said that was a good man. "Few," said Horse Egan, when a burial party had taken over the burden. "I am powerful dhry, and this reminds me there'll be no more beer at all." "Fy not," said Dan with a twinkle in his eye, as he stretched himself for rest. "Are we not conspirin' all we can, and while we conspire, are we not entitled to free drinks? Sure his ood mother in New York would not let her son's comrades perish of drouth if she can be reached at the end of a letter." "Ure a Janius," said Horse Egan, "o' course, she will not. I wish this cruel war was over and we'd get back to canteen. Faith, the commander-in-chief ought to be hanged in his own little sword belt for mackin' us work on Water." The Mavericks were generally of Horse Egan's opinion, so they made haste to get their work done as soon as possible. and their industry was rewarded by unexpected peace. We can fight the sons of Adam, said the tribesmen, but we cannot fight the sons of Eblis, and this regiment never stays still in one place. Let us therefore come in. They came in, and this regiment withdrew to conspire under the leadership of Dan Grady. Excellent as a subordinate, Dan failed altogether as a chief in common, possibly, because he was too much swayed by the advice of the only man in the regiment who could manufacture more than one kind of handwriting, the same mail that bore to Mulcahy's mother in New York a letter from the colonel telling her how valiantly her son had fought for the Queen, and how assuredly he would have been recommended for the Victoria Cross had he survived, carried a communication signed, I grieve to say, by that same colonel, and all the officers of the regiment, explaining their willingness to do anything which is contrary to the regulations, and all kinds of revolutions, if only a little money could be forwarded to cover incidental expenses. Daniel Grady Esquire would receive funds vice Mulcahy, who was unwell at this present time of writing. Both letters were forwarded from New York to Tehama Street, San Francisco, with marginal comments as brief as they were bitter. The third three read, and looked at each other. Then the second conspirator, who believed in joining hands with the practical branches, began to laugh, and on recovering his gravity said, Gentlemen, I consider this will be a lesson to us. We're left again, those cursed Irish have let us down. I knew they would bother. He laughed afreshed, give considerable to know what was at the back of it all. His curiosity would have been satisfied had he seen Dan Grady, discredited regimental conspirator, trying to explain to his thirsty comrades in India the non-arrival of funds from New York.